How cool would it be if you could control somebody's brain by doing one simple thing? We're going to talk about that a little bit later, but first, the theme song. Hello and welcome to the Story Lab. That was weird because it caught me off guard, except I was the one pressing all the buttons, so it shouldn't catch me off guard. But welcome to the Story Lab. Today we are jumping into why stories stick. Why are stories so important? What makes them actually stick with people? Why do they resonate? And we're going to go through a whole bunch of reasons, but also I'm going to talk to you about a little bit of brain control at the end of the episode. Let's jump up right into this because I love to talk about this stuff. It's a little bit nerdy. I'm just going to give you some information. Bear with me. It's all going to make sense, and it's all why stories stick. So let's start with the fact that your brain is wired for stories. Your brain loves stories. Your brain lives for stories. But your brain is wired for those stories. So what happens when you tell your brain a fact? Like, I'm 24. Well, the language processing area is going to light up a little bit, little blip. The comprehension area of your brain is going to light up a little bit, little blip. But that's it. It's a tiny little flicker of activity. Nothing really major. But when you hear a story, if it's a story where somebody talks about the texture, the mic has this foamy feeling cover on it, that's going to have your sensory cortex light up because that's touch. Then if I say that I was running for my life and I was barely able to stay ahead of the bear that was chasing me, well, that motion, that lights up your motor cortex. That activates it whenever there's action. And then I share how I escaped running that bear because I'm 24 years old. I escaped running from that bear and I got to get home to see my family, and I never thought I would see them again because I thought I was going to be eaten by a bear. Lights up your emotional centers. It lights up those emotional centers. Anytime there's conflict or feeling and excitement, it's going to light up those emotional centers. And that's why I tell you, whenever you're telling a story, you got to make them feel something, because it's that feeling something that gets that story to stick. So let's talk about oxytocin. Oxytocin is a hormone, but it's a hormone that builds trust and bonding. So when you hear a narrative that's about struggle or triumph or overcoming the odds, all those things, your brain is flooded with oxytocin, which means that the person telling the story has built trust and you're bonding with that person. That's what makes you feel empathy and a connection to the characters as well as the storyteller. So it's no surprise that we remember messages that are wrapped in a story. That's why it's so important for you to build stories around what you're trying to do in your business. All right, next up, let's talk a little bit about history. We've been writing stories since we were cavemen. Pictures on the walls. They would tell a story. They would pass on information. It would let people know how to do something the right way. Things that were passed down from your ancestors. See, stories keep you alive because long before there was TikTok, your elders would share cautionary tales with you, or they'd tell you about the poisonous plants you didn't want to eat, or maybe even in more modern times, dangerous neighbors that you shouldn't be near. Can't go playing with Timmy down the street because Timmy's dad is nothing but trouble. Timmy's dad will shoot at you. Don't play with Timmy. Sorry, Timmy's. But those are all those stories. Now, people that listened to those stories and paid attention to those stories, well, they stayed alive longer. They didn't eat the plants that were poisonous. They didn't play with Timmy. They didn't end up dead because they ate the poisonous plants or Timmy's dad killed them. They lived longer, which means that people who listened to stories passed on their genes. More people listened to stories. So it kept us alive. And honestly, the more you keep alive, those genes pass on. So evolution pretty much rewarded us for our story listening brains. Another thing, let's go into a little bit of psychology. Humans are pattern-seeking individuals. We want to see the pattern. There has to be a pattern. So we make sense of the chaos by forming it into a narrative. We make sense of all the craziness by telling it in a way that's digestible. We assign cause and effect. We assign heroes and villains. We say this is the beginning, this is the end. It's creating a narrative, and we have a narrative bias. Even our own memories are reconstructed into stories. Sometimes not even realistic. Sometimes it gives us plenty of creative license. We remember a story very differently than somebody else might remember a story because our brain commits our stories to our memory in a way that makes sense to us. It may not be what really happened. Crazy, isn't it? All right. Now let's talk about the crazy sorcery I was talking about earlier. And it's called brainwave synchronicity. So when someone tells you a story, your brain doesn't just passively absorb the information. Your brainwaves literally start to sync up with the storyteller's brainwaves. This is called neural coupling. And this happens as you listen to a story. Certain parts of your brain start to fire in patterns that mirror the speakers. Your neural activity aligns in rhythm. It's almost like you're tuning into the same radio station. You are hearing the same music. Your brain is reacting in the same way as the storyteller. The more vivid and engaging the story, the tighter the coupling. And this isn't just hearsay. Researchers have observed this with an MRI and EEG scans. They can see the brain start to lock into the same wavelength. It's crazy. So what's the science behind it? I'm going to have to read some of this. So a famous study by neuroscience scientist Uri Hassan at Princeton showed this in action. So a speaker told an unscripted story while hooked up to a scanner. Later, listeners' brainwaves were scanned as they heard the recording. The result, the brain activity began to mirror the storytellers, even in complex regions related to emotion and meaning. So it's like a brain-to-brain handshake. Stories connect people, literally. So why does it matter? Because when your brain syncs with somebody else, your comprehension improves. You don't just hear the story, you understand and predict what's coming next. Your connection with that person deepens. You feel closer to the storyteller because your brains are quite literally in sync. And that means trust increases because shared brain activity creates a rapport and empathy. So this is also why people who tell stories feel magnetic. You aren't just captivated by the words. Your brain is rhythmically dancing along with theirs. It is experiencing the same thing when you're telling a story and you're hearing a story. So I know that was like crazy, right? Brain syncing because of a story, but it's true. Let's make it really simple. When you tell a story, you're not just transferring information. You're synchronizing your brain with your audiences and creating a shared mental experience. An experience that you will remember. That's why stories are so powerful. That's why stories with a message, the message is remembered. If you want to tell a story that's compelling, that gets your audience to understand something, that connects on a deep level, so much so you're actually syncing your brains, tell a story. Share stories because stories are what gets remembered, and we want your story to be the one they remember. So I will see you next time on the Story Lab, where we sync brains like magic. Have a good one. Take care.